Hi and welcome back to the studio again. This is part 2 in our series of what driver suits my game, and this is just a short section to talk about the loft of the club. In part 1 you'll recall we talked about the head design, the weighting of the club, where the centre of mass is and how it affects the ball flight. I'm going to talk about loft now because the manufacturers always print a loft on the club. This one says 10.5 here. And we have a lot of people come in the shop and say, I want to hit it further, can I use a 9-degree driver, for example, assuming that lower loft is just going to send the ball further. So today this section is just a little bit about how to choose the loft of the club and what's right for your game.
So in this simple little diagram here, it states the obvious to some extent that if you have exactly the same ball speed but launch the ball at different angles, it goes on a different trajectory and therefore travels a different distance. I know the angles in here vary considerably, but it even matters with a driver changing degree of launch angle by a couple of degrees. It's very important. Just imagine it's exactly the same as a garden hose pipe that you might be holding parallel to the ground. As you elevate the hose pipe, the splash of the water moves away from you till it gets to an optimum point, and then when you go too steep it starts coming back towards you. So that's the sort of playing around with the trajectories we need to do with driver to find your optimum launch angle. Now it really doesn't matter what the manufacturer wrote on the driver in terms of loft, because that isn't the important thing. The important thing is what launch angle the ball leaves the club face at, and there are quite a number of different factors which will change this launch angle over and above and including the manufacturer's loft that they've put on the club. So let's talk through now a few of those other factors which affect what launch angle you create when you strike the golf ball, because there's much more involved than just what loft the manufacturer put on the club.
Okay, so when we look at a driver face in terms of loft, the manufacturer has put 10.5 degrees on here, but actually that's only the central point of the golf club. If you look really closely, you'll see that a driver face is not flat like an iron. It's actually got a curved face, both in 2 dimensions, top to bottom, left to right. So it's only the very central point that is reading the loft that it says on the club. The loft at the very bottom of this face is 3 degrees less than it is in the centre. So this is 7.5 here and 13.5 at the top. So you can see it becomes very important which part of the face you strike to determine how much loft is actually on the club at the point of impact. Let's look at other factors which might affect the loft of the club. So the next thing we call is dynamic loft. So at the point of impact, when your club is coming into the ball, how much loft you present to the face we call dynamic loft. So if your club head is ahead of your hands, for example, you're going to be applying a lot more loft to the ball than if the handle wins the race to the ball. You're applying a lot less loft to the golf club. So we're not really interested in what the manufacturers have written on the side. We're much more interested in how much loft you show to the golf ball at the point of impact. Ideally, we're trying to get the perfect launch conditions of the ball from the tee peg to maximise your distance and control of the ball. The faster someone's club head speed is, the lower loft they can withstand in their golf swing to create distance. So if you're a very slow swinger of the golf club, you're going to want a launch angle somewhere around about 16 to 18 degrees of loft. And if you're a very fast tour player, you're going to want a launch angle somewhere between 10 and 11 degrees of loft. My perfect launch angle is around about 12.5 or 13 degrees, just to give you some idea. But I wouldn't buy a 13-degree driver. And why is that? Because the final factor in terms of loft is what we call angle of attack. You may have heard us say this when you're in lessons and things, but with a driver, the reason we tee it up so high on a tee peg is so that we can actually catch the ball on the upswing. And by catching the ball on the upswing, this automatically adds loft to the driver going through the ball. So I use a 10.5 degree driver and I try and launch the golf ball between 12.5 and 13 degrees of loft for my optimum drive.
So let's have a look at all the shots I've hit today. I've tried to break them down into 3 different launch angle categories. Low, around about 10 degrees. The mid launch angle, you can see there's around about 12.5 degrees. And the high launch angles were at 18 degrees. The other thing I've done is I've brought my club head speed back down to 90 miles an hour for all of these shots. They've all got the same club head speed. That's just in response to a few people who've said that they can't relate to the higher club head speed I nearly said very high then. I've only got about 105 miles an hour clubhead speed, but the average club member we see in the studio is round about 90 miles an hour, which is why I picked that figure. So let's have a quick look then. We can see that a low launch shot at 90 miles an hour, too low in this case at 9.8 degrees, only carries 190 yards. When that launch angle is picked up to 12.5 degrees, we get a bit of extra backspin because there's more loft on the club. This stabilises the flight, makes it fly better, and it's carried 21 yards further than the low launch angle. And then when we go a little bit above the optimum to the high launch angle at 18 degrees, the backspin just gets a little too high, it starts to stall in the air a little bit. This will cost you a bit of distance, still went 203 yards, better than the lower launch angle. So it's sort of telling us that if you're going to err on the side of a driver with a little bit too much loft rather than too little loft, it'll be better through the air, carry further, and ultimately be more forgiving and make you hit more fairways.
Okay, so that's us now having covered the loft of a driver, and along with part one, which was on the head design, we've only got one more to come, which is the final piece in this series of 3 on the shaft, after which you'll have learned all about all aspects of the driver, and hopefully you'll know which driver now suits your game. So in the meantime, thanks for watching, take care of yourselves, we'll see you after lockdown. In the meantime, bye for now.